Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror, movies, and awesomeness. This week we will wrap up our look at the horror anthology films of the British studio Amicus, which every week I've been calling The House That Dripped Blood. And this week we're going to discuss the 1971 film that bears that name, The House That Dripped Blood, directed by Peter Duffel. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the Alex Van Helsing novels. With me from Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, writer for Rockabilly Online and creator and writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man. Say hi.
Don't call me mister. I work for a living.
All right, then. Lieutenant Drew Edwards. And from Los Angeles, Adam Foshko, screenwriter for Skylander Superchargers, story consultant for Destiny the Taken King, writer and creative producer for Call of Duty Advanced Warfare Exo Zombies. This is a man with a lot of games on his resume. Say hello, Adam.
Hi, how are you tonight?
Outstanding. I'm really glad to be back after away. That's when I'm away. Okay. And finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Hola, hola, hola.
Hola. And welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, according to Wikipedia, The House That Dripped Blood is a 1971 British horror anthology film directed by Peter Duffel, distributed by Amicus. It stars Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Nairi Dawn Porter, Denham Elliott, and John Pertwee. That is a heck of a cast. The film is a collection of 4 short stories, all originally written and scripted by Robert Bloch. This is not his first time at bat in an Amicus picture. They're linked together by a protagonist in each story's association with the building of the title, The House That Dripped Blood, which is a particular house.
Except it doesn't actually drip blood.
Although there is, in fact, no blood to be seen, which is...
There's no dripping.
Yeah, that's the shock of the film. Is that
Not even a leaky faucet.
There is, right, nothing drips. There are no drips in this thing. The last movie we saw, there were like jars with labels like odds and ends. This one... not a jot. The film carries.
But there wasn't an actual vault in that, in fairness.
There wasn't an actual vault?
There wasn't. And Torture Garden featured very little torture. I think this is a theme with Amicus, actually.
That's true. Torture Garden featured very little torture and to my knowledge, no garden.
And Primal Fear is neither about anything primal nor is it fearful.
That's
although Tales
right,
from the Crypt did have a crypt.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. I mean, so what can I say? Go ahead, Adam.
No. I'm just true.
So, okay. The House That Dripped. We're going to start. What I should do is get our opening thoughts. I was going to dive right in, and I apologize. It's been like 3 weeks since I've done this, so how embarrassing. Let's get our opening thoughts. Let's go Drew, Joya, Adam, and then Jason. And somewhere along the way, we're going to have to talk about Amicus and how we reckon that it holds up as a body of work. So this will be our last time at bat. So you might say a little bit about that, but mainly keep your thoughts to House of Dripped Blood, and we'll come back around. And I want to keep coming back though to the theme of what is Amicus doing and where does it fit into the tradition. So starting with Drew, opening thoughts, House of Dripped Blood.
This is actually not the first time I've seen this. I don't remember precisely when the first time is, but I remembered the John Pertwee vampire Cloak story like nearly perfectly, and yes. I must have seen it when I was a kid, probably on TV. But I like this. I think it's fun. I don't think if I were to rank it, I think I probably would rank it ahead of Tales from the Crypt, but behind Vault of Horror and Torture Garden. Torture Garden certainly being the movie that I enjoyed the most out of this set. Mm-hmm. But it's a lot of fun. It's got a really good, really strong genre cast. I mean, it's kind of, as a horror fan, it's kind of hard to argue against this cast at all. I mean, it's just fun to see all these actors in one movie. I find myself even though I enjoyed it more than Tales from the Crypt, I do find it a little bit more on the breezy side. Like, it's not staying with me quite as well as the other movies. Like, I find it sort of fading into the back. Like, I didn't think about it very, very much after I watched it. It was just like, oh, that was fun, and, you know, moved on to something else.
That's an interesting test, actually, of the film, is to think, you know, how well can you remember the parts afterwards, and yeah, some of these can be challenging. Okay, all right, good. Like, you know, there's somewhere in the middle, but not as memorable as you'd like. Julia, lay it on us. House of Drip Blood.
Well, I liked a lot of things about this movie, not the least of which is the cast. I thought it was a really great cast. I really liked the Christopher Lee story, the third story. I thought that was the best story that we've had in this whole Amicus retrospective. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed him and his performance, and I enjoyed Doctor Who, Pertwee, the first story, and I enjoyed Peter Cushing. So it was, you know, it was really fun that way. And then, you know, some of the elements of some of the stories were a little silly, and we'll get into that more. But yeah, but I thought it was neat.
Thank you, Adam.
This is not the first time I've seen this movie, but kind of like Drew, I feel like I've seen the Pertwee vampire segment more than the rest of the movie, but maybe it's just something that stuck with me for longer. The times that I've seen this, I sort of likened it to sort of like the Thin Mint of horror. It's sort of like it's horror that you watch after horror, which is you know, if you watch something particularly sort of wrenching or highly dramatic or something like that, it's what you put on sort of afterwards to sort of cool.
Like the horror cognac.
Yeah, it's sort of like the after horror, and it is a little breezy. It's true. You know, I still think it's you know, it's interesting to watch it, and you know, particularly through the eyes of Torture Garden and other movies like that. I tend to agree with the ranking. Torture Garden is still by far my favorite, and I still like this well above Tales from the Crypt. But it's, you know, I think that it stands on its own. I do like it. It's something that I think whenever it's on, I probably would sort of leave it on. But it's not nearly as memorable as any of the Burgess Meredith stuff. And I think that the thread that runs through it, you know, the story that surrounds the other stories, you know, I think that even though I like the idea of the house and all that, it seems like one of the weaker mechanisms. Torture Garden being by far, I think, one of the better ones. But you know, I think it's great. It was great seeing John Pertwee in something. I happen to like the bit. You know, I like that whole story about, you know, the vampires and sort of, you know, even if they liked his eccentric performance, you know, inviting him in to be one of them. You know, I think that's all really great. Not like anything with Ingrid Pitt, but that's just, you know, that's just part of, you know, sort of what I like. So I liked it.
It's an insanely good cast, and you know, this is one of the, like, as far as horror movies go, this is one of the most all-star casts I've ever seen. If they had been able to add Vincent Price to this, it would be bizarre.
I want to talk about Vincent Price more when we get to the John Pertwee one.
Yeah. So I won't even belabor that point, other than I agree with everybody so far that Torture Garden is by far my favorite. I think I enjoy the grisliness of Tales from the Crypt more than I like this movie. They're very contemporaneous. I mean, this one comes right before Tales from the Crypt. You know, it's funny. It's 1971. The fashions are very exciting to look at. It's just amazing how much crazy clothing you see wander through this particular thing. But to get straight to the framing device, my final thought is something based on what Adam said, which is that the framing device here is a very bored policeman who has come looking for a missing actor, and he's a detective from Scotland Yard, and he's sort of getting the information from the local constable as he investigates the strange goings-on, various tragedies that have occurred at this house. And the problem is, you know, Burgess Meredith in Torture Garden had, like, verve, you know? He's, like, lighting matches and sneaking up behind people and changing clothes all the time. And there's just something sort of exciting about watching him introduce each of these bits in the way that he does. And in this movie, the detective doesn't seem to want to be here. And so I just found the whole framing story kind of plodding. Like it you know, it doesn't really set me on fire. And so maybe, and Amicus will get better, but that's where I wound up. I mean, what did you guys think?
I actually like the framing device better than the one in Vault of Horror, but I don't think it holds up to very close scrutiny. Like, why does the realtor keep renting this house out if he knows this really this is like it doesn't really, like, if you sit there and think about it, it doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense.
When he was, you know how he kept saying, have you figured out the secret of the house yet? I thought the secret of the house was that he was feeding the house. You know, like he was like some kind of like agent of evil.
Yeah, but no, the secret of the house is just that. I mean, it's the most sort of kind of toss-off explanation, which is the house just introduces the bad things that will sort of emanate from your own personality, which is absurd. It's like saying this is an Amicus anthology because it is a movie by Amicus with a bunch of stories in it. You know.
Well, especially since some of the stuff has nothing to do with the house, like the Wax Museum one. You leave the house. The Vampire's Cloak one, they leave the house. Like, it's one thing with the Christopher Lee story and the story about the horror writer. Those actually mostly take place within the confines of the house.
That's right.
But two of these stories have a lot of action outside of the house, and in fact, the things that trigger the supernatural events are actually things that are some things that are not from the house. They're from, you know, a wax museum and then like kind of a junk shop. So it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a brilliant critique. I mean, you're totally right. If you think about the good ones or the best ones here, the Denham Elliott story and the Christopher Lee story, both of them involve somebody having an adventure having to do, in a sense, with this estate that they've moved on to. But those other two, the only connection is that the person lives there. Adam, did I interrupt you, or were you going to say something?
No.
I thought I interrupted somebody. Okay, so I was wondering, you know, imagine, if you will, that the story had been a real estate agent leading the people around the house, you know, and you know, having the Burgess Meredith kind of verve. I think, you know, like, and in this room, this happened, you know, and maybe she, like, sweeps her arm dramatically, and then you fade sort of through the doorway and into a story, you know. That would, to me, that kind of, like, immediacy would have worked a lot better. So I don't know, do I like this? You compared it to the framing story in Vault of Horror, and if people don't remember, the framing story in Vault of Horror involves a bunch of guys who come to a basement level on an elevator that drops them off there, and then they just sit down, start smoking and drinking and telling one another stories, which is almost daring in its lack of storiness as a
it's the Donald Draper of horror framing devices.
It was so I kind of like
style.
Yes, it was very stylish, extraordinarily stylish, you know, and this one, I don't know. So maybe we spend as much time on this framing device as we can. But I felt like it's getting the movie's getting off on the wrong foot by giving us character, like at least one character who's really sort of bored or appears very bored to find out. But anyway, the first story we go into is a Robert Bloch story that I think Stephen King could easily have written, which and as I think about it now, I think Joya mentioned that it was very Shining-esque, which is this story of Denham Elliott, who moves into the house because he wants a country home in which to write his crime thrillers. And it's the story is called Method for Murder. And in this story, actually, you know what? I should give it to somebody else to set up. Basically, it's a story of a man who appears to be haunted by a villain of his own imagining. Julia, do you want to explain what goes on in Method for Murder?
So he's got this little adorable blonde, or not, is she blonde? I don't know.
She's blonde,
yeah.
Wife.
You know, wife, and she's very sexy and everything. Anyway, so he's writing, and yeah, it is very Shining-like because he is like he's a writer, and he's going to be kind of getting into this dark place, and he talks about how when you write a character, sometimes you become that character, and you just kind of absorb, like, you know, you can become obsessed with it and whatever. So he's created this strangler character, and he actually has drawn a beautiful picture of it, and he starts to imagine that he sees him placed everywhere. And the reason that I don't like this story that much is because it's when the guy appears, and eventually you find out why, but when the guy appears, it's so silly. Like, he just pops up and he's like, hey, like a stupid look on his face. And I wasn't fond of that. But I thought that it was, interesting story that he would start to kind of go crazy and start seeing this guy. And at one point, he sees that the guy is strangling his wife, and then he walks up to her and he says, this guy was strangling you, and she says, no, it was you. And earlier he had said, look, he's here. Do you see him? And she said, no.
That was a very unnerving scene, by the way.
Yeah.
That was where it's like, can't you see him? He's in the room.
Yeah, he's in the room. And she's like, no, I don't see him. And then he strangled you. No, that was you that strangled me. And she's like freaking out. So she's like, you need to go to a therapist. So then he's going to a therapist, and at one point the therapist gets strangled by the guy. And it's like, wait, what just happened? So then you find out that the woman, in fact, has set all this up, and she's gaslighting him, and she's got her boyfriend, her lover, is dressing up like this character and going around and appearing and doing these strangling the therapist in order to make the therapist get the husband sent away to wherever, prison or the insane asylum, and she can get the money, all his money for his royalties. But the thing is, when she talks to the boyfriend, he shows up at the house, he's like, oh, yeah, I killed them both. And she's like, wait, that wasn't the plan. You weren't supposed to kill them both. That totally messes everything up. And then he's like, oh, and she says, Richard. And he's like, who's Richard? I'm Dominic. Yeah. Suddenly he's like strangled her. So it was the dumbest ending to that story because, I loved the twist of it being her gaslighting him, but I didn't like the twist of now suddenly Richard has become Dominic. That was just stupid. So, because he was like, oh, as an actor, I've become so involved with this character that I've become him, whatever.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I was really surprised when it turned out that she was setting him up with this guy. I was like, oh, okay, I didn't see that coming.
I wasn't surprised by that at all. I found the story extremely predictable. I mean, it was entertaining, but
the problem was the bit about method actor going maybe a little bit too far to the level of insanity seemed like it was really cheap. It was like a cheap way out of the story. And you're right. This was, the setup was good, and I love Denham Elliott. I almost wish he had done the vampire one at the end, since he played, Dracula once upon a time. That would have been sort of interesting. But I thought the setup for it was kind of okay. Although you're right, Julia, Dominic was completely lame just throughout all of it. There's nothing scary about him. It just seemed like, who's the guy with the wig and the teeth and the? Come on.
Yeah.
You know who Dominic looked like for me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
He looked like the cartoon donkey from Hee-Haw.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, he has. But okay, there's a couple scary moments of Dominic. Yes, the detracting thing about the scary moments of Dominic is Dominic himself, who never looks scary. But let's assume for a moment that he looks scary. There's the moment when Denham Elliott insists that he's there and the wife can't see him, and he's moved into a corner and stuff like that, is so I found that to be really funny and kind of scary. And then I love the moment when Denham Elliott's walking and he tosses a sheet of paper from his manuscript or whatever it is. He tosses it into the river, and Dominic appears on the other side of the river and picks the paper up. That was cool.
Yeah, that was cool.
I thought that was really neat. And I've never seen Denham Elliott looking this young and fit. It's really kind of funny to see how because I think of him as Marcus in Raiders of the Lost Ark and all that stuff.
Right, you see him kind of young, but with an ascot or something, which is kind of weird.
Right. No, it's true. We've got plenty of really, really craze-tastic 70s fashions going on all through this movie, but in this one, a lot. He wears these doofy sweaters and ascots, and I like her big white hats, but she wears a lot of, terrible 70s fashions. Yeah, which is funny because it's 1971, so it shouldn't be that bad. But the clothes are just something to behold.
Yeah.
So yes, so that's what kicks us off. I got one final thought, which is that the twist where the boyfriend has gone crazy, and so now the wife who connived against Denham Elliott is going to get killed. That may be a dumb extra twist, but it's very in keeping with, I don't know if he's going for an EC Comics thing, Robert Bloch, or if he's thinking of it that. But if I were to think if this were part of the Tales from the Crypt collection, that payoff would be completely in keeping with the rest of them. Because the person who connives always gets their comeuppance. No matter how dumb. I mean, wouldn't you agree? Think about, in, I guess it was, which one was it in with the razor blades? Oh, that was Tales from the Crypt. They always get it.
It is a very EC Comics morality. It doesn't. This would fit very. Honestly, I feel like a lot of the stories in here would fit very well within that universe.
Yeah, and the only difference is tone. This one's played straight. When we get to the vampire story, there's almost no moment that's played straight. And I have to say it is kind of cool that they can mix up the tone of these stories in here. Okay. We boom out of that story and we go into Waxworks. And Waxworks has a very, very tiny cast, and I have to tell you, I don't completely know what to make of this story. So in here's yeah.
No, I thought about this some as well. So, go on. I'm curious your thoughts.
All right. Just the 20-second setup for the story is Peter Cushing is a retired gentleman who buys this big house that I guess Denham Elliott has now moved out of. So Peter Cushing moves into it, and he is
Denham Elliott is dead, so of course he moved out of it.
Actually, he's been carried out of it, probably.
Yeah. Sorry. So that whole family's gone. So now Peter Cushing, a confirmed bachelor, has moved into this house. He's quite used to being alone.
Actually, I don't think Denham Elliott moved out, honestly. I think he kind of stuck around.
You think as a ghost?
Yeah, I think they all stick around as ghosts.
You are imagining a much cooler finale than actually happens in this film. But okay, fine. Sure. I actually like that idea. I wish that were here. Anyway, Peter Cushing moves in. He's very lonely. We see him gardening. Here's your garden. He gardens, he walks, he shops. He's enjoying he listens to music. All the things that he says he's going to do, it's kind of funny because the realtor goes, "Whatever will you do in your retirement?" He's like, "I shall walk and garden and listen to music," and we see him do all of those things. So, which is really great.
I should wear a sweater.
Yes. Oh my God, those sweaters. He wears,
that sweater is so ugly.
I like his clothing. He's quite.
No, the clothing. I will say the entire movie. I forgot to say this in my opening comments. The entire movie, I was like, "Oh my God, these clothes are hideous." Except for Christopher Lee, who always just wears the classic.
Well, Christopher, right? His clothes are classic Savile Row. Nothing ever changes. Peter Cushing here is quite the dandy. I mean, he wears these really.
He was so gay.
He does read as gay. That's I can't get away.
Guys, confirmed bachelor.
Yes.
Confirmed bachelor who wears pink shirts and seems very happy when his buddy's going to come spend the night.
Adam's point is that's what confirmed bachelor means.
Yeah, I'm saying confirmed bachelor who wears pink shirts and invites his yellow shirt wearing buddy to spend the night.
He's like army buddy shows up and so it turns out that this army buddy or whatever he is, they both shared an infatuation, so they tell us, with this particular woman who neither of them could in fact ever win. Face it, chum, we just weren't born to win this woman. And so they spend the evening together, and then in the morning they go wandering in town antiquing. The two confirmed bachelors go antiquing, and they come across this waxworks that Peter Cushing has actually come to before. And the one thing that is key about this waxworks is it has in it a wax effigy of this woman that Peter Cushing has been obsessed with. And here's the problem. I don't want to like waste you guys' time just blabbering on about how this plot works out. But the thing is, by the time the two men are both sneaking away to see the waxwork and getting the attention of the proprietor, who's very jealous of the attention of the wax figure that looks like their former lover, I've kind of lost track of whose story this is. You know what I mean?
Well,
right.
I mean,
it has nothing to do with their obsession with the actress, or does it? Did I hear something important?
The only way this made sense to me was somehow that this woman, whoever this woman was, that they both tried to settle down with this woman or something, and they both failed, and she was gone. I don't know if we ever actually knew what happened to her exactly.
Right.
But
it's not the same woman who married the guy, right?
Yeah, no, she was the one who got put to death. She got executed.
So she
right. The way that I took it was that woman, for some reason, married the waxwork guy, and then
completely clear about why that was.
That actually is the same woman, which is why they're both attracted to her. And then the story kind of unfolds from there. But the only way that it worked for me at all was if that was the same woman.
Yeah, no, that's the same woman. Okay. So, yeah, they're fascinated by her because that's her. And the story that the husband tells is, she killed somebody and then she got put to death. But then later on he's like, actually what happened was I actually killed that guy and I wanted her body, so I got her framed for it, and then when they put to death, I got her body and I stuffed it, so that's her actual body.
Yeah, but I get that. But the thing is, so I don't understand how, after watching this twice, it still was not completely clear to me that it was, in fact, the same woman that they had been in love with that had remarried the waxwork guy.
This is honestly my least favorite of the bunch.
Yeah?
I wish I liked it more because I love things set in wax museums. But
sure.
It's just this chintzy, cheap feel to it. It doesn't look as nice as the other ones. And I like Peter Cushing,
well put
but
together.
Yeah.
It's almost like Peter Cushing drew the short straw on this one. But the thing is, I think part of what doesn't make any sense is these are two people who obsessed over this woman, and yet neither one of them seems to know that she married a waxwork dude, or that she was subsequently put to death, because one of them is still carrying a picture of her. You would think he'd be like, whatever happened to her? Oh, I don't know. She married a waxwork guy, but unfortunately she went crazy and killed people, and then she was put to death herself. Oh, that was so sad.
To Drew's point, to Drew's point about waxworks, you've got there's been some wonderful waxworks in the movies. We watched House of Wax, right? But now Drew, I kind of like the chintziness of this particular wax museum, like the fact that it's, I believed it as a set. I think maybe if we'd had a better story, I would have totally enjoyed hanging out here because, they're crappy wax figures. This place appears to be free. You just sort of walk in.
Yeah, people walk in and out all day, evidently.
Yes.
Yeah.
Meh.
Maybe he has a coffee shop in there because there's no, like, I don't see the point of the free wax museum. And
let's see. See the terrible Wolfman figure and espresso.
I would totally go to that place. If you,
it was like an early Barnes and Noble.
Yes. If you would please start a waxwork that sells coffee, I would totally hang out there like every day.
When I win the Powerball, that's what I'm doing.
But yes, I'm watching now the movies playing on my TV in my office, and Peter Cushing is wandering around outside in his really smashing, tan sport coat and ascot, and thinking about the woman he left behind and so forth. I mean, so I don't know. I like this one for its stylishness, but the story, honestly, takes so much head scratching when you're done going, oh, wait a minute, was the woman? Why didn't they know this? There's too many jumps in logic and too many coincidences. And then in the payoff, they get killed by the angry husband. That honestly, I just didn't care.
So first pulls a James Bond villain thing and tells him the whole plan and the whole, like, everything he did.
Yes. Right, that's true.
Just
Well,
in case they get away.
The other problem is it's a double payoff because Peter Cushing goes in and then sees that his friend has been decapitated and made part of the waxwork, and then then the guy does his thing and pulls out his axe, and then there's like a little bit of action, and then you think he might get away, although he's not going to, and then somebody else comes in, a little bit later on, and then you see now the other guy's head is gone, and now Peter Cushing's head is there, and it's kind of like, I feel like I've seen that. The shock value was diminished.
Well, they must
have,
right. The Amicus must have thought this was the best story because it's the one that's on the poster.
Is that so? Oh, you're right. The skull-faced lady. You're absolutely right. I don't know if they thought it was the strongest or just thought it was the.
How did he fix her, by the way, after that? Like, she gets
slashed. That was my question.
Her skull is, huh? I guess he's a wax worker, so he probably just made her wax. Well, I guess that's what it is, that he just makes her, because that means eventually her flesh would deteriorate anyway, so I guess he just has to keep wax coating her.
One presumes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I think there are a lot of cool stories that could have been done around this little waxwork. And it's sort of funny because, this is Robert Bloch. He's able to come up with some cool twists. But I know that he's probably laboring under a need to get a story in a certain number of pages, and not make it too long and
right.
to have a certain amount of gore. And so in the end, what you have is kind of a rushed idea that doesn't quite pay off.
Do you think this one actually, in terms of production, got more of the effects budget because they just kept making waxwork heads of different people? It seems like this is the most effect, if you call it that, they're almost like practical effect heavy sort of, short of John Pertwee flying around in his cape, but it seems like they just kept making stuff for this particular one, which is odd because this is not one of the better stories.
No, you're absolutely right. But we've seen that 1,000 times, right? Where a movie is going, in much bigger and more daring films than this, where a movie is going way out of its way to spend lots of money, but the story just isn't quite there. And we've spelled out exactly why it's not there. The fact that something can be just 15 minutes long and I'm confused about a major plot point doesn't bode well for...
Right, should not be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bloch is a professional. He should be leading us by the hand. That's okay. So on we go to a movie that Julia called literally the best story of the entire retrospective that we've done. And that's Sweets to the Sweet. Julia, do you feel comfortable, or if not Julia, does anybody feel comfortable doing a brief synopsis?
Well, I can tell you.
To the Sweet? Okay.
Yeah,
it's your favorite, so go crazy.
Yeah, so Christopher Lee is kind of a very stern, serious businessman, very handsome. He's got awesome suits. And he has this little daughter, who's just a really lovely girl. And so they move into the house, and he wants to get a live-in nanny / teacher to his daughter because he's not going to send her to school. He doesn't want to send her to school. He doesn't want to send her any place with like boarding school or any place with other children. So she shows up and she's like, I'm going to take her to the park. He's like, no, just stay here. Just don't do anything. And then she's like, well, okay, so she just plays with toys? What? And he's like, nope, no toys.
No toys.
So she says, well, I'm only going to not take her to the park if I can buy her some toys. So he's like, fine, whatever. So then she gets toys and she comes back and the little girl just falls in love with this baby doll that she brings home and he sees the doll and he gets so angry. Oh, and the little girl's terrified of the fire at first, but then she gets over it when the nanny's kind of, showing her that it's really beautiful and there's nothing to be afraid of. Anyway, so then he shows up and he's like, what the hell is this baby doll? And he's like, I told you didn't say you could give her a doll. And she says, you said toys. And he's like, no. And he grabs it up and he throws it in the fire. And the little girl's just so upset. And so, of course, we just all think that he's just a monster and what is wrong with him. And then, she realizes, well, he gets upset that the candles have gone missing. And he's not sure what's happening there. So the nanny is like, what's your deal? Why are you afraid of this chick? And he's like, I am afraid of her. And he starts to have horrible pain. And we see the little girl just giggling madly as she's stabbing the crap out of this little wax voodoo doll that she's made out of the candles. And so it turns out that his wife apparently was a witch, and his daughter's now a witch. And she's, like doing all this voodoo doll stuff because, of course, he's not very nice to her, so I kind of think maybe he could have handled that differently.
Yeah.
But but anyway, it's a really wonderful, creepy, spooky story because just watching the evolution of these characters, where at first you think he's the monster and why is he treating her like this, and then you're like, well, maybe she's got a weird thing, like maybe she's got multiple personalities, or who knows what her deal is, but he must be, the way he is, he must be protecting other people from her because there's got to be something, but we don't know what it is. And then the whole witch thing happens, and I did, the little girl's like looking up witchcraft in the encyclopedia and everything. And so, so then when she's got the gleeful delight as she's stabbing the wax voodoo figure, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, she's got a few screws loose as well. And then he finally tells the nanny, he's like, she's made a voodoo doll of me, and you need to get it, or I'm going to be dead. And then the little girl, as the nanny walks toward her, she throws the voodoo doll in the fire, and you just hear him screaming in agony. It's a very well done story. I really, really liked it a lot.
Thank you very much. I mean, that was well told, and yeah, you're not sure what's going on. There's a very effective mystery. You don't know, you don't know why he's being so cruel to her, and there's this interesting idea of witchcraft here, where witches in this story seems to be almost a racial thing, like a witch is almost like a non-human creature who has certain powers that she will.
Right, the heritage thing.
I'm sorry.
It's the heritage thing. It's almost like you're born a witch, supposed to be a witch.
Right. Like born a witch. As soon as you learn about it, you're going to start doing it.
Well, the story reminds me. Well, also, on some levels it seems very like Village of the Damned, and on other levels it reminds me of something almost you could see, and it's so tight. It reminds me a lot of some of the stuff on Twilight Zone or even Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, I think this might have been This might have even been a night gallery. Well, it's really very familiar about it.
Yes, absolutely. Everybody's doing a good job. You've got this wonderful little cast of the nanny who wants to do good, and she's somewhat stern but also very sympathetic towards this widowed father. You've got Christopher Lee being his usual ultra slick self. This girl, this young actress who plays the daughter, is fantastic. She's really good at playing sort of spacey and disengaged, and also at having fun and asking questions. Her name is Chloe Franks, and she's really good. I have no idea what. I know that she did a number of things in the 70s. I don't know if she continued to act, as she grew up, or if she had, more sense than that. But she's really fantastic here. So I think the story's over too soon. One of the major problems with any anthology is that if you have a story you latch on to that you think is a really good one, this story could be 90 minutes long and I would be fine with it. There'd be so much stuff that you could do. I'd like to see a relationship grow between the dad and the nanny. I'd like to see a little bit more like mystery about or discovery about like what the girl is capable of or what the mother was capable of or why she died and all that stuff. But there's no time for that. We've got to wrap it up. But I thought that, so far the last two, we weren't crazy about Robert Bloch, what he came up with. This time he does something really good. So that was cool. Any other thoughts on this particular one, on Sweets to the Sweet?
I have to say, I really think Christopher Lee adds a lot to this, because Christopher Lee, unlike a lot of other horror actors of this time period, he just always brings this very serious quality to him, and because he's so serious about this, you take what's it. If Christopher Lee is fearful of this girl, then you feel okay feeling fearful yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. That there's something we're not seeing, and we know that it's, you're right. He has so much elegance and, I don't know, instant respectability and believability that is like.
Well, plus the added genre cache of being Christopher Lee.
Yeah, and he's so tall.
Yes, that's true.
But we have to mention that John Pertwee line about how he loved Dracula. Well, I guess that's in the next movie.
Yes. Well, yeah, no, but John Pertwee will do a sort of funny hat tip to Christopher Lee in the very next scene. He
talks about how he loves vampires, but he loves the Dracula movies, but with the original guy, Bela Lugosi.
With Bela Lugosi, not that new fella.
Not that new fellow who's been playing Dracula now for well over 11 years or so. But yes, yeah. And this is easily more of an interesting role than Christopher Lee ever got to play as Dracula. He got to do some other interesting things in Hammer, like when he was Duke Richelieu. But this is a good little role. So yes, I like this one. And once again, just as Drew pointed out, the story takes place in the house, but it has really nothing. And at least it's in the house, so that puts it sort of, better than the one where the guy had to leave to go to the waxwork to find a story. But nevertheless, it doesn't really have much to do with the house. He brought the girl in.
I think the thing that we've learned about these is with the exception of Torture Garden, the wraparound stories really have fuck all to do with that.
Yeah.
They're just,
it's an excuse. It's the.
Excuse my French, but it's there's thread there.
Yeah.
Maybe if we ever get around to watching the rest of these, I'll run across one that has like they tried to have a good wraparound story with Torture Garden, and they really put a lot into that. The rest of these,
that was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say I kind of like Tales from the Crypt as well, because at least
I like Cat's Eye. How Cat's Eye, there's this cat that just kind of roams around from story to story.
That's true, and the cat's the one who connects the stories. That's totally true. Well, yeah. So Cat's Eye, which is not an Amicus picture, but still is one.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm talking specifically.
Oh, yeah. No, I know.
Well, sure. There's Asylum or something like that.
Asylum is a good wraparound, and we're not doing that one in this retrospective. But you're right. With that one,
if we ever get around to doing the rest of these, Torture Garden, really they just put their best foot forward.
That actually had a beginning and a middle and an end to it. Here you're kind of going, why is the cop so bored and doesn't want to be here? And even though he's included in the end of the wraparound, you're kind of going, wow, that's there's no resolution there whatsoever.
Yeah.
You're just kind of like, oh, okay, this really was just a thin mechanism. There's nothing really there.
Which is funny because you've got the coolest, most morphable plot element that ever existed in any story, which is that of a big haunted house. And yet they can't think of anything to do with it. But have somebody sit in an office across town and talk who owns this?
Actually, it's two offices across town. One is the police station, and the other is actually the realtor's office.
Isn't that silly? And by the way, this house, incidentally, is an actual place. Although, I posted a helpful video on our webpage, on our Facebook page, that shows the house as it actually appears. It more or less looks the same, except for that the production designers have extended the front of the house with an extra wing so that it looks bigger than it is. It's actually quite a narrow house.
So you're saying it's bigger on the inside?
That it is bigger on the inside, that the inside is Shepperton's.
No wonder John Pertwee lived there.
Exactly.
Yes.
He's still wearing.
I have to mention
he's still wearing the puffy shirt.
Oh my God!
And he has a picture of himself with the Doctor Who car on his mirror.
I should point out that picture, that painting of John Pertwee. Let's move right into the one about John Pertwee. That painting of John Pertwee in a puffy shirt and a blue jacket, you may as well call that a painting of the Third Doctor, because that's him, man. I mean, this next story is called The Cloak, and it immediately sets itself up as a comedic story because it has this piano that plays over that we tend to associate with comedies that did bits about silent film. I don't know why that's chosen, but it's shown to show that we're supposed to find this guy ridiculous. He comes rolling up in his classic vehicle, and he has on his arm the very beautiful Ingrid Pitt. And
I would have, as much as I like John Pertwee, and I think he does great in this. This is they wanted Vincent Price, and I think that this would have been 1,000 times better if it had Vincent Price.
Oh, sure. Well, Pertwee was good. I mean, he sort of plays this. Now we just call him sort of Peter Vincent-esque sort of character. Where he's not. I mean, he's not beyond his prime. I mean, he's still definitely acting and doing stuff, and he's probably at the height of his power, maybe, or just maybe just starting to wane a little bit. But Price would have been kind of amazing. At this time in his life, let's see. When did the Raven happen? Wasn't the Raven sort of like?
It's 1960s, I recall. The thing of it is, apparently Vincent Price was contracted, and so he just simply couldn't winnow out.
Well, I wonder if during that time, because Price you took as being was serious, certainly for a time, but then there was a phase in there where, with the Raven.
We're not in that time here, though. This particular period is. It's theater of blood. It's like
post Egghead on Batman.
Yeah. That was in the 60s. This whole period of like the late 60s and through the early 70s are all like, goofy horror. I mean, look, they're wonderful. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of like goofy comedies and beach party movies and all kinds of stuff like that. But
none of this is a criticism of John Pertwee. I think he does great in this. I just actually have it. John. You think of John Pertwee, and the first thing you're going to think of is Doctor Who. Whereas, to have an actor that is actually heavily associated with the horror genre, I think would have added an extra level of postmodern.
No, you're right. You're precisely right. Although, so when the plot kicks off because this, John Pertwee, the actor, is starring in a vampire film, and he's not happy because he doesn't like his costume. Let me just point out that the stuff that and this is Amicus. In theory, Amicus knows something about horror, but I am deeply annoyed by all the bullshit that, if you'll pardon my language, that John Pertwee spews. because he's like, the good old days. I liked real horror films with real realism and actual sets, not this cardboard garbage. And then he mentions things like Bride of Frankenstein and Dracula and stuff like that. I mean, that's bullshit. Those movies did not have practical sets. I've never seen a horror film with a practical set until the 60s with European horror films. The American films were always...
Yeah, but they didn't look... Like, the Bride of Frankenstein doesn't look shoddy.
No. Does not look shoddy. That is absolutely correct. No, it looks beautiful. But it's... but this idea... I don't know. He's asinine, basically, and I guess that's...
Well, he's supposed to be pompous. He's supposed to be pompous, though.
Right. He's pompous, and he's not even right, which is annoying to me. I mean, I think if at least, I think if he's supposed to be this obnoxious, he at least should have like his basic facts correct. But no, nonsensical stuff.
That's what's setting you off.
Yeah, that was what annoyed me. I was like,
that's fair.
Well, it reminded me of, remember in The Lost Boys when we have all this stuff where Corey Haim goes into the comic book store and he impresses the Frog Brothers who run the store by talking about how they need to rearrange the comics to be correct. That'd be great, except for that all the stuff he says is made up stuff. And I was like, all it would have taken is for you to call somebody on the phone and say, tell me 3 sentences Corey Haim should say that would make me believe.
They didn't have Google in the 70s and 80s.
I guess that's the answer,
Research used to be a lot harder. You actually had to go and do stuff.
You had to walk around.
Nowadays you can do research on your phone, man. We're spoiled.
No, I guess you're right. But all you'd have to do here is call somebody and go, hey, if this guy is like really into classic horror films, what are some obnoxious things he could say to people that would
But here's the thing: we will pick up on that. But the average Joe Schmo who goes and watches this movie is not going to pick up on that.
I guess you're right.
And they were probably thinking that people were going to be discussing this movie 30-odd years later.
And yet here we are.
And they probably could have just asked, Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing, for that matter, and been like, what do people say to you?
Right.
I sort of feel like this was Amicus kind of getting a jab in Hammer.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Especially with Ingrid Pitt, who's the vampire lover's girl, and the whole idea of the big gothic, set. Because one thing that, considering that there's so many gothic kind of motifs in this movie, this is not a gothic movie, really. And, no, you're right. This is their sort of wink at Hammer, and the whole thing is played for laughs. And ultimately...
Well, I kind of wonder if it was like, in a way, it's kind of like a backhanded compliment, because it's like, well, isn't all this stuff awfully archaic? We're giving you modern horror that takes place in a world that you can relate to, whereas all the rest of this stuff is just sort of fantasy land.
Actually, as soon as we finish talking about this story, I want to ask you a little bit about Amicus in general, exactly that thought. But so I think that is kind of the idea in this particular story. The payoff is goofy. It's really just a minor laugh. That's the main problem. Is I'm not really being entertained by watching John Pertwee mug around with this.
I like this story. I think the Christopher Lee one is the best done, but this one is the most entertaining to me.
Yeah, I thought it was as well. I don't know whether it's because we know John Pertwee from Doctor Who, whether it sort of becomes like double or triple sort of reflexive or something like that. But it seems like, he's mugging. It's being sort of played up. Ingrid Pitt is in there, and then there's a whole bit about, the vampire's cloak, and that's ridiculous. It's all ridiculous if you think about it for very long at all, including the guy who sells it to him. But the fact that she does the switcheroo when he tries to convince her that the cloak will turn him into a vampire, and does
that was kind of
the Shepperton Studios cloak, and he doesn't do it, and then she actually pulls out either his or one of her own. It's really hard to tell. And then she turns into a vampire and basically says the best line of that whole bit, which is, "Hey, we loved your movie so much, we wanted to make you part of the family," or whatever it is she says.
Right.
And
that's right.
I was like, okay, I liked that. It was nice. It was a nice bit, and you went, oh, okay, and that was fine. And then you go back to the rapper, which is, the cop again, the really kind of bored cop, and then he's talking to the realtor, and he just kind of goes, "Hey, I'm going to go there myself." You still don't know why he's just annoyed by everything, this particular policeman, but I know he just, you go, okay, I'm sure we're going to find out about this now in a minute. He gets the keys, and the realtor goes, "Why don't you let me go with you, or at least go, in the daytime?" He's like, "No."
Like not at midnight, yeah.
Right. I mean, that seems to be the time to go, evidently. That's, all policemen must go investigate at midnight. The creepy house that apparently drips blood, and, the secret, the attainable secret, which we are meant to sort of figure out, but is a little bit murky. So he goes, and he, I like the fact that he goes there, opens it up, and then, has to, he doesn't have a flashlight or anything, so he, has to light candles. You go, okay, annoyed cop, investigating at midnight, now must do the gothic horror thing and carry around a candelabra with like 6 giant candles like Frau Brucha. And then, thank you. And then what I like, of course, is the fact that as he's lighting the candles, there's the big painting of John Pertwee. I'm like, oh, okay, this is all kind of coming full circle. And I'm like, wait a minute. So does that mean, and I began to think, like what Julia said earlier, is the whole bit about this place that, like Hell House or The Haunting or something, are the souls of people who have met their end, are they trapped in this house? Does the house sort of eat, kind of, for lack of a better word, just sort of eat their souls and they're kind of there? Oh, is this going to be a thing where they're all going to be there? And, he makes his way down into the wherever, and then the clock continues to strike midnight or whatever, and there's a coffin, and the coffin opens, and there's John Pertwee, who looks a lot like Blackula.
Yeah.
In this particular thing, I was like, oh, God, that was odd. And then he gets up, and they have this sort of fight, the most sort of ineffectual fight I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the policeman could have probably taken a matchstick from his pocket and jabbed it into his chest. And that probably would have done it. It basically drives us.
Well, it's just as bad. May I interject? It's just as bad. It's just as bad as the fight between Peter Cushing and John Forbes Robinson in Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, where
they just an awful fight.
He just kind of lunges at Peter Cushing, and Peter Cushing just kind of.
Well, and it looked so stupid. Like he's just holding out the stick, and he kind of like
and John
pokes it forward. And it doesn't look. It looked almost like he was handing it to him. Really.
No.
I thought the cop, by the way.
Go ahead.
The cop reminded me so much of Chris Kattan as like aged.
Interesting.
Well, I just sort of hate the fact that they just had this great line about how they love his movie so much they want to turn him into a vampire.
Right.
All they do is hang out in the basement of this house instead of going off. I wanted vampire John Pertwee to have awesome adventures with Ingrid Pitt.
That would have been amazing if they just had done something like that. But instead, she rises, and he first of all disappears in the most unceremonious, like, okay, we're out of money. He's going to disappear now because he's been stabbed with, he's got a stake through his side, I guess, and he disappears unceremoniously, leaving behind the cloak. And then, another coffin opens, and there's Ingrid Pitt, who then inexplicably sort of semi-turns into a bat and kills the extremely bored policeman.
Yeah.
I think it would have been fun if they would have done this story first, and then during the other stories, you just see, like, Ingrid Pitt and John Pertwee in the background just biting people.
Oh, my God. Wouldn't that be great if Ingrid Pitt and John Pertwee if that had happened, like if this was the first story, and then after that Ingrid Pitt and John Pertwee pour themselves in like goblets of blood, maybe they tap the guy's neck like in the other movie. And
didn't
then
that
like,
kind of actually drip blood?
Yes,
Yeah,
and they could say,
yes.
you know who used to live here? That writer, that guy whose books are on the shelf, he was actually very interesting. It's an interesting story.
Yeah.
And then it would go, and then it would go, and
instead of having it be the board cop and the real estate agent, it's
Yes.
vampires.
in the course of this podcast, we've come up with 2 possible framing stories that would be better than the one that we got.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
yeah. So that's so. Here's what.
Wait. Now you have to do the bit where basically you got the realtor who shows up, kind of like Burgess Meredith, but sort of like the low rent Burgess Meredith, who literally and figuratively, who just kind of says, I hope you like, perhaps you will like the house. I hope it rents soon. Do you know what? Something like that. And I'm like,
it was like the house attracts people, and with it brings out their personality. So it just needs to find the right person. Maybe that's you. It's like, yeah, okay.
And I was like, they went, the Burgess Meredith thing worked so well. And
Torture Guard, man. Peter Cushing said the same lines in front. I think it came from the grave. The next one, From Beyond the Grave, which comes like a couple of movies from here. Precisely the same bit where he turns around and he goes, perhaps we have something that you would want. Blah blah blah.
It does not work here. It falls flat like its shoelaces have been tied together in the darkness.
But it's because there are no surprises. You're done here, and there's no surprise. Sometimes I don't mind something being not surprising if it's comfortable, and so somehow I kind of enjoy the payoff that I expect all along. But in this case, there's nothing to surprise me at all. I know that this is coming, and I just want to get through it so that we can get on to the final credits. And you're right. It's and his explanation is lame. Like I said, it's this notion that he goes, have you discovered the secrets? It's that the house brings out basically what you already are, which was like Bill Cosby's classic definition of alcohol. And I don't know. By the way, very strange to be making reference to Bill Cosby since everything we know about Bill Cosby has changed. Nevertheless, that was always an interesting observation on his part. But, okay. So I want to, before we talk about this movie in general, like final thoughts, I wanted to put this movie in context of Amicus, because in the course of this retrospective, we've watched, just to recap, Torture Garden, The House that Dripped Blood, Tales from the Crypt, and Vault of Horror. And what I'm trying to figure out is, like, what does this... So this is real. Okay, here's the thesis. The thesis is it's very strange that there was like a popular series of anthology films that like came every year for like well over, like it went from 1965 to 1975. So for a full decade, there were like these regular multi-story films going on. They came and they went. And so I wonder, what is the lasting impact of these? Are these important? I mean, is it worth knowing about these? Is it a fool's errand to try to glean any meaning from them? What are we?
Well, I mean, as a form, you mean, like as an anthology, as a theatrical feature-length anthology?
So, I'll tell you what I think it is. I kind of feel like these films are a reaction to the Gothic, very similar to the reaction that was going on with things like The Exorcist and stuff like that. They're distinctly about modern horror, and they always take place in the modern. And I think they're an attempt to kind of speak a language of horror and discontent in late 20th century Britain. But and they're distinctly in dialogue with Hammer, which was more, at least when it was doing it right, was more about escaping from 20th century Britain. But I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out where they fit into the tradition. Like in the end, is that something worth knowing about? Is it worth digging?
Well, these movies do have a cult following, because I know people who are rabid about Amicus. I mean, my editor on Halloween Man loves these movies.
Really?
These are his favorite horror films. And
really? So
yeah.
when you ask him, what's your favorite about these things? What do you think draws him back to the Amicus pictures?
We've never talked at length about what his favorite aspects of these are, but maybe that's probably faulty on my part. But I think he's actually written stories in this style, because he's a writer in his own right, and. I think he even right down to the sort of slapdash wraparound stories, I think there's just something he enjoys about the style of this, much in the same way, I enjoy the style of Universal, and, some people enjoy the style of Hammer. So I think there's that. But, he's English, so there might be a cultural thing there. But, he'd be the first to tell you, Hammer doesn't really speak to him. And,
right.
This does. And, maybe, and he likes slasher movies too. So maybe he just enjoys that 20th century, mid to late 20th century kind of vibe of horror.
Well, go ahead.
But
go ahead.
No. Well, I mean, now that you've said this, I'm almost embarrassed I haven't grilled him a little bit on this while we've been doing this retrospective. But I have been thinking about him a lot, obviously, since we've been doing these. And we've had a lot of conversations on Twitter about it while we've been doing this retro. So I don't know.
What's interesting is between the UK and the US, at this time there's there's a rise of anthology shows on television, which utilize a lot of television and film actors, who were able to. They couldn't be on a show regularly, but they could come in and they could do a few days, or they could do a day while they were actually doing something for. Early on it was Tales from Tomorrow, then it was like Alfred Hitchcock, and it was all these One Step Beyond, all these various things, and even in the UK they had these shows. And what's interesting is I think what we're sort of seeing is a very modern take to be able to bring star talent to talent that would bring people into a theater, because they've seen them in Hammer and various other kind of movies, that adds a touch of style, of class, of gravitas to what amounts to a series of films that are sort of reasonably inexpensively put together with a wrapper. From a business model and from a form, this became very acceptable, and it was something that people sort of liked. In television, and then you see the rise of it in this kind of movie. I think particularly in the UK, what's sort of interesting is I think it trails, I suppose, what was sort of the appetite for it in America, but I think that it definitely reflects a particular time and a particular style, and it's the idea is that you could. We look at it through EC Comics and whatever else, and that sort of, that's a style unto itself that speaks to a younger generation. I mean, this
I will.
The British weren't even aware of those. Oh, go ahead, Drew. Sorry.
I will say, as much as I've enjoyed these films, this does not speak to me as much as Tales from the Crypt or Creepshow, which is a refined Tales from the Crypt.
But look where you live now. I mean, if it was in 1970, you're looking at. I mean, there's a period of sort of general disillusionment. you know, and there's definitely a break with the older traditions, you know, and it's sort of interesting to see where everybody is in 1970 and the generation gap in the U.S., you know, post-60s, and you've got Vietnam. I mean, you've got all this stuff going on. And I think we've even said, I forget which movie it was exactly, but one seemed like it was a whole lot nastier.
Yeah. It was Bolt of Horror. It was Spirited was the one.
Yeah, because it really does reflect, you know, a sort of a society and sort of a general societal mood, I think, at the time. And, you know,
well, it's funny though, because I think that the Tales from the Crypt TV show is a lot more sardonic than
but now
these.
It's a form. But now it's like it's gone to it sort of has been codified and set up as now we have an expectation, which is we've got the morality play. We've got, you know, bad people. Bad things happen to bad people, usually in the most sort of, you know, interesting, sardonic way, and sort of tongue in cheek, but also sort of horrible. But enough time has passed, we've come to accept it. But this must have been, you know, completely different. You compare this movie, which I think one of its contemporaries might be The Devil's Reign, and you go, God, okay, that's completely different. How like that left field, right?
But that's a good reach. But I think you raise a good point, which is that these movies are as different as a movie can possibly be from everything else that's out there at this point. You're totally right. There is,
and that's probably why we are talking about this decades later.
Right. I mean, think about it. If every year for 10 years, oh look, there's a new Amicus movie. Well, we got to go watch that, boys. You know, we all go. I can totally see that. I mean, and also when you think about it, look at the texture of the Amicus films. Admittedly, many they're shot on sets, but look what we're seeing on sets. We're seeing middle class people and some upper class people. Sometimes even working class people, you know, having their breakfasts, going to work, riding the bus, driving. It's an everyday world full of texture that you recognize in your everyday life, and but into those lives come these bizarre, these bizarre supernatural moments. And
it does fit very well in with the sort of Stephen King idea of horror, where it's like we're taking horror out of Transylvania and putting it into your backyard.
Right. That's the big dialogue, really, of the 60s and 70s, at least as far as British cinema goes, is which kind of horror do you want? Do you want the kind where you escape to the past and it doesn't have much to say about us, but it's a brilliant escape? Or do you want the kind that looks kind of like our lives, but shows you kind of the possibility of some sort of lingering evil underneath? And I dig both. I actually have a hard time choosing between. I'm probably in the end more of a Hammer enthusiast than an Amicus enthusiast, but I find that really compelling. With this exception, and Adam, this is probably a feeling that you may share. I don't know about these, but like I do find that compelling. But if you said, "Oh, well, then you're in luck because I have a brand new anthology that takes place in Brooklyn, and you know it's hipster horror, and you know here's these guys at a haunted Whole Foods, and all this stuff is going on. Look, it's the world, it's a layer of evil underneath." And I'd be like, I don't want to see that. I do want to see the real world of the 60s. I don't have much interest in seeing the real world of 2016. You know,
Whole Foods. I'm sorry, I'm going to be stuck on that.
Well, no, I mean, you know, listen, the Brooklyn Amicus is waiting to be made, Drew. All you got to do is write that thing, and it's
No, thank you. No.
The haunted Alamo Draft House of Austin would be so. But yeah, I mean, so I think to some extent the fact that they're so time stamped actually makes them more appealing to me. You know, the fact that they are definitely locked in the 60s and 70s.
Completely. I agree with that.
Can we wind it up a little bit here?
Yes, I suppose we should we should get our final thoughts on the House of Driftblood, and then come around and do endorsements. So we went Drew, Joya, Adam, and then I'll go. So Drew, final thoughts on The House That Drips Blood, and also on anything else that you've gotten out of this particular retrospective. Lay it on us.
I liked this movie. I don't know if it would make it into my regular rotation, but I enjoyed it. I would like to see the rest of the Amicus anthologies at some point. Now that I've kind of dipped my toes into this, I think. We're discussing this versus Hammer. I think I lean more Hammer because I'm a monster guy at the end of the day, and Hammer brought awesome versions of Dracula and the Mummy and Baron Frankenstein and all that great stuff. So I think Hammer hits more of the right chords for me as a genre enthusiast because they're legitimate creature features. But this was fun, and I would look forward to doing more of these if we ever get around to them.
Cool, very cool. Julia, what are your final thoughts? House and also Amicus in general.
Well, I kind of feel like I said, I think that aside from the Christopher Lee story, I've thought, and I guess the John Pertwee story sort of, but really the Christopher Lee story most of all. I didn't think that this was that much better than any of the other ones, but I really liked the Christopher Lee story. And, I just think that they're kind of, I wouldn't want to, I almost feel like we did too many as it is. I feel like it's kind of the same thing over and over, and to me, I just don't, I get that it's a formula, and that's the point. It's like complaining about, I don't know, like the Mission Impossible movies being alike or something. It's like, yeah, I guess that's the point. But it's not my favorite thing. I really like a little bit more creativity in my framing story, and so to me, some of these movies like what's it, 4 Rooms or whatever, where there's the stories intertwined in a really neat, creative little way. That's what I like. So I would rather see that than just we all are in the same house. That's about that's it. We don't even use the house for anything. So I would have preferred to have that the framing stories be more throughout the whole retrospective, be more inventive a little bit. But I did enjoy it, and there was definitely some that I thought were fun. And being somebody who has kind of a short attention span, I do like the short stories.
Mm. Oh, good point about that. Adam, what are your final thoughts?
As I've been discussing this movie with you guys, I'm liking it less and less, which is a terrible thing. So,
when that happens? Oh my God.
It's just awful. So I hate feeling that way. But I think it's just simply because of the framing device and my dissatisfaction with it. Again, whenever I talk about Amicus, generally, like, I think about Asylum, and particularly I think of, and I usually mention Torture Garden. I think that to me probably is the the most representative, piece of work that, in my opinion, I think that sort of when all the stuff more or less hits. So this is all right. Amicus in general, that occupies a certain place in my heart. I think the same way that Anthology television tends to occupy a place in my heart. It's an area that my family worked in Anthology television, and certainly in British cinema as well, and television. But so to me, it occupies a certain place in time, and I think it's interesting because in the same way I can look at though it's not on Anthology, I can watch Dr. Phibes, and that to me is a slice out of time that's very, very specific. As much as the merits of the movie itself, it's just sort of like when and where it takes place, and the social stuff that was sort of going on at the time that went to kind of fuel it. So I think that's all very interesting. I think that I don't think you have to really make a choice between Amicus and Hammer. I think you don't have to be Coke or Pepsi. I think that I think really Hammer has such a body of work, and is such a fundamental and foundational kind of we'll call it a super genre unto itself, that it can coexist with Amicus in the same way that you have serious drama and you have comedy and you have satire. There are certain things that, you know, play off of each other, but are not meant to necessarily replace each other. So, you know, I think these things can coexist. There's probably a greater likelihood that I'll sit down and watch a Hammer picture from start to finish, and this kind of thing might actually just sort of be on in the background, and I could just sort of check in on it, and it would be fine, because it is sort of light and breezy. And even, you know, even a movie like Torture Garden, as light as it doesn't really sound like by its title, you know, you could sort of check in and out of that and feel like that, you know, you've seen it before, or you know, you could drop in on it at any point and not feel as if you're missing out. It's just the fact that you can sort of sample it, and it's completely fine. So anyway, I think they're great. I'm glad that they're still around and we're still talking about them.
Yeah, no, that's true. Thank you for that. So wonderful. I probably have jabbered on enough about Amicus, but I'm really, really glad that we did this retrospective, mainly because it reminded me of. But I don't think I'd ever had a chance to sit down and look at a bunch of these together and see the various trends. And it's wonderful to see these artists sort of do better work in one scene, in one sequence, and then worse in another, and constantly be resetting. And to Joya's point, I really love the idea of getting 4 times as many characters in any given movie. So yeah, sometimes I'm left going, wow, that could have filled up a whole 90 minutes. It's really neat that you get so many different stories, and so that's cool. I'm very pleased with them. Adam, I know there's some truth to what you're saying about Amicus really playing with the disenchantment of the early 70s. I know that's absolutely got to be true. I don't know enough about that particular disenchantment to be able to comment on it, although I know for darn sure that that's what everybody says. So I think that's sort of a realm for me to do some more reading and find out more about what is the world that one would encounter when one left the theater after watching John Pertwee putting on a magic cloak. You know what?
It's a world of terrible sweaters, is what it is.
Yes.
As Julia.
Oh no, awful ascots, and also, like, if I recall, all I know is what was going on in the United States. And in the United States, things have been crap for years. I mean, think about this: the period when Amicus was coming to the United States. When you walk out of the theater, you walk into a world where Richard Nixon told people not to burn Christmas lights because of the fuel shortage. You know, where in very recent memory, both Kennedys plus Martin Luther King have been assassinated, where fuel is skyrocketing. So things are pretty darn crappy at the point that these films are coming out. So you're right. It's impossible to see these and not think of what is the world that one is escaping from, and then to realize how interesting it is that one would be escaping into a world that looks pretty much like our own. It just has a lot of magic and murder and crazy stuff like that. So, all right, let us get our endorsements, and I think this will be fun because we haven't talked in a couple of weeks. So I hope you guys have all at least watched something interesting that you want to tell us about,
or read.
Or read something, yeah. So, whatever is on your mind, what you've been reading or enjoying or even writing, it doesn't matter. You can tell us about your own stuff if you like. So, we'll go Drew and Julia, Adam, and then I'll go. Drew, do you have anything to endorse this week?
I have a few things I want to get in here. First off, there is a new issue of Halloween Man on Comixology. Your homework, dear readers, go buy it. Review it, give it 5 stars on Comixology, tell all your friends. We worked really hard on this one, and we got a lot of good stuff coming up later this year, but this is going to be the last Halloween Man for the foreseeable future because we have a lot of stuff in production. So, you want to get your fix right now, you got to read this one. Non-self-centered endorsements. I got a bunch of the Boom Studios Hellraiser comics for Christmas, which are very, very interesting sort of counterpoint because earlier this year, Clive Barker put out the Scarlet Gospels, which was his quote-unquote last Pinhead story, like his final word on the whole Hellraiser mythology. These comic books are plotted by Clive Barker, and they ignore pretty much all of the Hellraiser sequels that come after the third one.
Huh.
But
so Barker plotted the comics himself.
He plots them, and then he has a co-writer that then scripts them. But they're interesting because it's almost like a counter story to what we're giving in the Scarlet Gospels, which was sort of Barker commenting on this pop cultural creation that he sort of unleashed on the world accidentally, whereas this actually has, in some ways, like if you're looking for more of like the philosophical questions from the first two Hellraiser movies and the Hellbound Heart story, this is in some ways is probably going to fit your tickle your fancy a little more, because it asks questions like what does Pinhead do when he's tired of being Pinhead and in fact might actually want to go to heaven? Is hell actually bad because they punish bad people? So, there's these sort of philosophical questions that are going on in this, which are really fascinating. And they bring back the Kirsty Cotton character from the first two movies, and she actually ends up being a new female Pinhead by the end of the thing. And she's fascinating because she is actually coming from the standpoint that hell is not evil, because we are here to punish the wicked. So we actually are serving God's plan. So it's a really interesting take on the whole thing. I would highly recommend somebody looking for a slightly more cerebral horror comic. It sort of fits in the bill that the old Vertigo comics used to hit. Like I've been really enjoying them. The third thing is actually a counter endorsement. I am actually saying I'm not endorsing something. I would like to say that I am 100% against the new M. Night Shyamalan made Tales from the Crypt that is supposed to be coming out later this year. It is a terrible idea. No Crypt Keeper. No Danny Elfman theme song.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
No Crypt Keeper. Right. No Danny Elfman theme song. And they're not adapting EC Comics. In fact, it's going to basically be American Horror Story with Tales from the Crypt lathered on over it. Screw you, M. Night Shyamalan. You just picked on one of my sacred cows. Just fuck you. Like, if you wanted to do your own terrible horror show, that's great. But don't ruin Tales from the Crypt. Tales from the Crypt deserves a real revival.
Well, what if they wind up going in a totally different direction? I guess we'll find out. Like maybe
it shouldn't be a totally different direction. It should be Tales from the Crypt. Like do Tales from the Crypt or don't do it.
But what I mean is what you've heard so far. So very true. They're probably going to make terrible choices. But let's say. But I'm just saying. Hold out hope that it may turn out that everything.
No, there is no hope. This is what we're getting. This is what we're getting. This has been announced. This is, and the only reason why they might decide to change that is because horror fans across the world are shuddering in anger and pain as their childhoods are once again being tentacle raped by Hollywood. Like I just M. Night Shyamalan, he's made a few good films, and he does have a tendency, like, if they, I don't know, just thumbs down. Huh?
No, I'm following you. Yeah. All right. So
thumbs down to that. Give me Tales from the Crypt or give me death.
Don't sugarcoat it, dude. I don't think you should go back.
Excellent. I got it. Very cool. Or very not cool. I hope they decide not to do that. I would be surprised. I have seen plenty of times when ideas come along and people go batshit in exactly the way you're describing, and then lo and behold, the project just simply disappears.
Yeah.
It appears a couple of years later.
I hope Tales from the Crypt deserves a real revival. Like not half-assed bullshit.
All right. Julia, what about you? Do you have anything to endorse or not endorse?
Yeah.
What half-assed bullshit are you upset about?
I do have something to endorse that I think, I don't know if Drew or Tony or somebody may have already endorsed in the past, but I was late to the party watching Jessica Jones, and it leads. I think that what Drew was talking about with the the Hell is Hell Good story kind of leads to why I love this show so much, and it's that I personally think that the character, David Tennant's character, Kilgrave, is so interesting because he's so complex as a bad guy, and I guess this is the case for most origin stories of any evil villain or whatever. But you see, you just see the pain. I mean, the fact that he went through this horrible childhood and that he's been so lonely, and he doesn't even know. He's like, I don't even necessarily want to tell people what to do sometimes, and I have to be so careful with my words because he's a mind controller. And he just says whatever. He goes. One time I told a guy to go screw himself. Can you imagine? It just made me laugh. But I mean, I think his character is so compelling, and Jessica's character is so compelling because she's not a good guy. I mean, she's very, she's an alcoholic. She's kind of a mess. She's not. So there's no black and white in this story, and I don't just mean because he's the Purple Man. But it's it's not, just clear cut. He clearly Kilgrave's the villain, but he's such a complex character, and I just think there's so much interesting stuff going on.
I did really like Jessica Jones. I think Marvel TV has been pretty cinematic. And their casting continues to be impeccable with all this stuff. I mean, I really enjoyed seeing David Tennant not having to play the Doctor, but he's still being able to utilize that charm that he has. So I agree completely. They did a great job. I'm looking forward to what they're going to do with the Punisher in the second season of Daredevil. I think that the whole Netflix Marvel TV has been wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's been really surprising when you think about it. Somebody says, "Hey, here's an idea for a superhero or for a detective show," and it's always boring to me to hear ideas about detective shows until I see the execution, and suddenly you're like, "Oh, I get it. I get it," and I'm impressed. And that gets harder and harder every year because we're blessed with so many wonders, right? But that means that there's just so much coming our way. But then I was shocked at how good that was. Absolutely. Adam, do you have anything to endorse for us?
It's the run-up for the award show, so it's pretty much, watching everything that's going in. And I've seen a couple of shows I really like a lot. I don't really have anything to endorse, particularly in our sort of set of genres right now. So I'm gonna hold off this week.
All right, no worries. So for me, two things I read that I really loved. First of all, Matt Fraction's Hawkeye. I think Drew might have mentioned this about a few months ago, but Hawkeye, the Marvel series, about the character from Avengers, turns out to be this amazing, surprising, moving, often extraordinarily funny comic with a very independent feel. And it's written by Matt Fraction, and it's just always surprising you with, it just follows Hawkeye as he goes about his superhero business, living in this rundown apartment building and being part of his community and dealing with local gangsters and stuff. But there's an issue that's told entirely from the perspective of a dog and told in dog language, so that all the word balloons that the humans speak are all just scratch marks because, of course, the dog doesn't speak English, but he catches a few words here and there. And it's just wonderful. It's really Matt Fraction's Hawkeye is an astonishing work. So I was really impressed with what Marvel was doing there. And the other thing is Rifftrax, which I go on and on about all the time, but I've discovered something new from Rifftrax, which is not the guys from MST3K, but they have a second team made up of, well, some of the cast from MST3K, but not the main cast, and that is Mary Jo Pale and Bridget Nelson, who were both actors and performers on MST3K. They have started doing a lot of shorts, like old industrial films, usually around family life, which is funny because they're kind of like quote-unquote women's issues. It's the women's team doing doing an industrial short about what you're supposed to act like if you go to prom and how to behave if you go to a party. It is so great. They're fresh voices, and I'm really enjoying it. And all of these shorts are like, usually like $1.99, and they're just delightful. So, you should definitely check out what Rifftrax is.
That's cool.
Doing. Yeah, neat stuff. So that is it. That wraps up our Amicus retrospective, at least for now. Maybe someday we'll come back and catch the other, I guess, 4 Amicus films to make a complete set. But or maybe actually we're only missing 3. So maybe in the summer we'll come back and pick up the other 3, so we'll have a complete set of Amicus anthologies. I really appreciate people sticking with us. I hope that you'll join us on the Facebook page, Castle of Horror, and explain why I've misunderstood the legacy of Amicus and engage with us. We totally enjoy that. And tell your friends about the show. Leave reviews on iTunes if you haven't, because really that does help people find the show. We're so happy that you're here, and we're excited to be back for 2016. Thank you, everybody, for being on. Have a fantastic week. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.